Hi, my name is Atilia. I'm a medical research graduate from University of Tasmania, Australia, and this is Lepas Sekolah.
Atilia, to start us off, can you tell us a little bit about your life growing up, what you wanted to be as a kid, and give us a quick overview of your journey from school up to where you are today?
Okay, so I was born in Kedah, but I mostly grew up in Selangor. I attended multiple primary schools throughout. I started in Perak and then moved to KL and then basically finished off in Selangor. And then I attended MRSM Langkawi for 2 years up until 2018. And then I moved to Cairns, Queensland, Australia to finish my high school. And after graduating high school there, I decided that I wanted to pursue my degree somewhere else. So I flew down south of Australia to Hobart, Tasmania, and that's where I pursued my degree in medical research.
Let's go to the very beginning, or at least the very beginning of your secondary school life.
Yeah.
How was MRSM Langkawi like?
I think just the life of a boarding school was different. Nothing much, I think, other than being surrounded by people from different types of schools, like high prestigious schools, rural schools, and I met a lot of different people. And I think the only struggle I had at the start was trying to make friends from scratch. I think coming from quite a rural school into quite a high prestigious science Mara College. But it's very exciting, lots of fun times there. I enjoyed the independence I had and having to like fly back to my school and back to home every break was quite fun actually. But I enjoyed the experience.
How was it adapting to a boarding school as a 13-year-old?
I think I quite liked it just because my parents raised me to be independent at such a young age. I mean, I wasn't as independent then, obviously, but I think it was mainly with trying to manage your own schedule, but also because MRSM taught us discipline a lot. I think it benefits us in a lot of ways, like personally and academically. But yeah.
Following from that, you left Malaysia, you attended Trinity Anglican School
Yeah.
in Australia, and that's such a big leap for such a young individual, right? Why and how did that transition happen?
I initially was quite happy in MRSM until my father had to transfer for his work, and so we were left with either staying in MRSM or follow him. Unfortunately, where my dad was working, it didn't have proper education for secondary and tertiary. So our only choice was to fly to Australia. And so we decided to move to Cairns, Queensland, Australia, which is the closest area to where my dad was. And that's how we ended up attending Trinity Anglican School. So it's a private international school. And we were initially wanted to attend boarding school there, but because they couldn't cater for Muslims for halal food, so we were like, why not we try foster family? So the school had families assigned for international students based on our criteria. So we put on like halal catering, dogs, for example, and then they matched us with the perfect parent.
When you first heard the news, right, that you were gonna transition and live and study in Australia, what was going through your young man?
Strangely, nothing was going through my mind because I was just purely scared. But I think the idea, it split me into like two different emotions. I think I was very excited to the idea of studying overseas. I think that's everybody's dream. But also thinking that I wasn't raised in an English spoken family. I knew no English to start with. And so moving there with not knowing how to speak English and not only not knowing the basics, but to speak with locals, moving there without my parents as well, I think that was the scariest part. And I think it would be fine if it was like uni, but moving there at 14 years old was a totally different story. So I wouldn't say a specific emotion was going through my mind that time. I was just purely terrified. But I think that was the biggest challenge that I took at such a young age.
How different was his school life in Australia compared to Malaysia?
Day to day, I would say generally it's quite laid back. I think with Malaysia, how we go to school at 7 and finish at 1 or 2 p.m. But with Australia, we start at 8:30 and we have like half an hour session of chilling and mingling around friends and teachers for half an hour. And then we actually start going to class at 9. And then we have two different breaks. We have morning tea and lunch. And then we go home at 3 p.m. And something interesting is also at 16 onwards, students tend to have part-time jobs. So after we finish school at 3, Some would go to sports training, some would go to do their extracurricular stuff, and some would go to their part-time jobs, including me. I worked at a restaurant, so I used to work at 4 p.m. onwards until 9 p.m. That was a totally different experience, but generally the school routine is quite different, and we didn't stay in one class like the teachers stayed in one class. We had to walk around and change classrooms, which was quite different to Malaysia. But yeah.
What were the hardest parts of adjusting to a new country?
I think mainly because usually moving abroad, there would always be like Malay communities and Muslim communities that you could always reach out to. But surprisingly, in Cairns, there were none. So me and my brother were the only Malay, were the only Muslims. And I was, in fact, the first ever female Muslim to attend the school. And considering that was an Anglican school, so a Christian school, it was very scary because not just that I was trying to adapt, but it was also my new friends were trying to adapt with me. It was their first time trying to make friends with a Muslim, for example. I think it was mainly the effort of me trying to portray myself well as a general, decent, kind human being rather than trying to portray like creating the stereotypes for people who are not as educated or aware of different cultural backgrounds, for example. And they were a lot more curious than they are ignorant. So I had no trouble with trying to adjust to their new cultures. And another one was, as I said, I wasn't raised in an English spoken environment. So I had no basics of English. When we had to video call the principal before we got in, I said nothing. My mom was the one trying to respond, and it was funny looking back, but back then I was embarrassed that I couldn't, like, how am I going to survive in this school? Like, moving to a new school was quite normal for me because I moved to a lot of new schools, and trying to make new friends was fine, but that was a different story because how am I going to make friends if I can't speak? But surprisingly, all of my friends were extremely supportive, and they taught me English, and it forced me to survive by speaking to them every day, and that's how I got here today.
For Malaysians who might not be familiar, what exactly is a Queensland Certificate of Education and how does that pathway work?
So Queensland's Certificate of Education is specific to its state. So Queensland has its own education system, and so are other states of Australia. They're not particularly different. It's just like slight differences, I think. But essentially, I know Malaysia focuses on SPM, which is like a national standardized exam where you take all these subjects and you are graded based on that. But QCE is based on ATAR system. So ATAR stands for Australian Tertiary Admission Rank, which is used for your university admissions later on. And it's a percentile-based ranking system where instead of giving a student a grade for each subject, they rank you based on your performance relative to the rest of your cohort for that year. So on a scale of 0 to 99.95, if you get an ATAR score of 70, it means that you are at the top 30% of the whole cohort. So that number basically helps the universities to determine whether you're eligible for that specific course. So courses like engineering, law, medicine would require generally a higher ATAR score.
In the intricacies, right? So the style of learning, the assignments, the assessments, how does Australia's education system differ from that of Malaysia?
Okay, so they're actually quite different. So to start with, I would summarize it as Malaysia focuses on memorization and facts and knowledge, whereas Australia focuses on thinking and communication and problem solving. So even at such a young age throughout secondary school, all the assessments are focused on how you would apply this knowledge in real lives, how you would apply this to solve a problem rather than trying to memorize facts. And I would say it's memorizing is a strong skill to develop, as well as critical thinking. And I think it's very important, as that's being largely used when you get to uni and when you get a job later on. But when I did my assessments in Australia, it's not like not facts oriented, but you tend to think more. You try to think, oh, like I've learned this, how would I use this to solve this problem, and how would this be useful in the future, rather than just memorizing, because memorizing doesn't guarantee that you would understand a specific concept. And I think that's very important because even if you get a perfect grade for that subject, if you got it solely from memorizing, do you actually understand it? Do you actually apply it? How useful will it be into your passion and your career life afterwards? Yeah.
What subjects or areas did you take while you were doing your QCE that you particularly enjoyed?
When I was in year 10, which was when I was 15, I actually took drama, which was very off to my passion. So my passion has always been towards science. I just wasn't sure what type of science would I pursue. But I took drama just for the fun of it, and I actually had fun. During the last 2 years of high school, I took all three sciences, so chemistry, biology, and physics. I actually wasn't the biggest fan of physics, but I had no other choice because I knew that science wasn't for me. I could not see myself doing other areas or other fields. And I also took geography, but I mainly love biology to begin with. I enjoyed genetics studies in high school, the studies of diseases, the human health, over like chemistry and physics. So yeah, always been inclined to science.
Having experienced both education systems, right? What would you say are the plus points of the Australian system and the plus points of the Malaysian system?
Generally, Malaysia is very good with building strong academic foundation, as I've said, with the memorization, with the exam-oriented assessments, and all this practice, all these tests and quizzes. It teaches a lot of discipline and like work ethic, having like all these deadlines and like the competitiveness of trying to achieve and get good grades for your SPM. It's very different to Australia. I wouldn't say like one is better than the other. I do want to say that Malaysia is very good with building this academic foundation, whereas with Australia, it's more developing various sets of skills with logical thinking, problem solving, analyzing. So all these sets of skills that you wouldn't think to do when you are like 14, but both are very strong in completely different ways. I think it would be a good combination if you have a very strong academic foundation on top of having those side skills of critical thinking.
You mentioned that you pursued all three science subjects, right? Were you always interested in the sciences, or was that something that developed over time?
When I was a kid, I wanted to be a spy.
Okay.
That's very funny. I don't know why, but and then growing up, I was like, I love like forensics. I love being like an FBI agent. I want to be a cop, and for some reason, obviously that didn't happen. So growing up, I loved science. It's just a matter of finding which areas of science. And because my dad worked in plantation, I wanted to be in agricultural science. But then growing up, I figured that I don't actually like plants as much as I like animals and humans. So then I wanted to be a marine biologist because living by the coast in Queensland made me love the ocean so much. After a while, and then the more I study in school, I actually liked the concept of human health, and then that basically drove me into liking human science and human health more.
So you received the Destination Australia Scholarship and the Tasmanian International Scholarship. Can you tell us a bit more about the scholarship and what exactly did it cover?
So Tasmanian International Scholarship is actually automatically offered to you as an international student. I think that's an initiative for them to encourage people to attend regional universities. So that was 25% of tuition fees covered. And then Destination Australia Scholarship is for both domestic and international students trying to enroll into regional universities. Because Tasmania was a regional university, I applied for it, and that covers, I think, 15,000 Australian dollars a year. And to get it, I think every uni only offered to 8 students. So I received that scholarship, and that basically helped me cover all the 4 years of my studies up until my honors year.
How did you first discover the scholarships?
I think it was pretty easy for me because every uni website in Australia would have, once you apply, they would list out all the eligible scholarships that you can apply for. So I didn't really look into what I could apply. I found that one, and that was specific for regional unis, and it was a decent amount to help with my tuition fee. So I just kind of applied from the website. It was not as rigorous as I thought it was going to be.
Earlier on, you remarked that the Destination Australia Scholarship only takes on 8 students a year. So how do you stand out?
I think it was based off my achievements and awards, and also my contributions while I was in school. It was only like an essay writing. Obviously, I think a lot of scholarships applications do that. I did a lot of community services back in high school. I joined this program where you go to feed homeless people every week, and then I also was awarded the most improved English second language student. I also got a few other awards from my high school studies back then. I achieved the Excellence in Chemistry Award. So I think those achievements made me stand out. Largely, it was my ATAR score that made me stand out.
The application process, you'd say, is quite straightforward. Is it just an essay or?
Yeah, so it's just a few questions. Why do you deserve this scholarship? What have you been contributing to the community and the school? That was mainly it. So that's pretty straightforward.
Of all the universities, why the University of Tasmania?
It's very funny because my dream was to study in Europe because I like the cold weather. I wanted to experience the four seasons. And because COVID hit
Yeah.
and Europe was pretty bad, so my parents were like, no, don't go to Europe, go somewhere else. And because I was already in Australia, I was like, how can I go to Europe but in Australia? So and then I found out about Tasmania. Actually haven't heard of Tasmania before. And then I found out that it's a nice area. It's peaceful area to study and the climate's good. It's very cold and I love cold. So yeah, that's what drew me down there.
So obviously you pursued a degree in medical research, right? I have to say it's not the most common degree choice among Malaysian students. So what drew you to a degree in medical research?
I get a lot of these questions from my friends. So to clarify and standardize, medical research was also previously known as biotechnology, and now it's been changed to biomedicine just to make it recognizable across the world. Medical research is essentially where you could get strong foundation of biomedical science, and at the same time you would develop a lot of research skills, so reading, analyzing data, writing scientific reports, and you also have this deep understanding of the tools, technologies that are used to address medical problems. So by the end of the course, you actually have a decent amount of understanding and relevant knowledge on how to address these public health issues, and most importantly, to communicate science to a broad audience, not only to scientists. So that's what the course is. And I think what made me wanting to pursue the course is I knew that I loved science. I love medical side of it, but I didn't want to become a doctor. I just don't see myself as one. So I was like, how can I be a doctor but without actually having that kind of work-life balance, not having to deal with patients directly? How can I do the behind the scenes? So found out about medical research and medical scientists, and I just love to contribute the same way as doctors do, trying to save lives, trying to improve the public health, the healthcare system, but by being in the lab instead, essentially, yeah.
One of the biggest points of contentions for people when they choose a degree is considerations that they have. So, what were your considerations? Was it passion? Was it employability? Academic interest?
I think it was largely on passion. I am quite grateful that my parents weren't the kind to pressure me into doing something that will guarantee you a job, essentially. I didn't really think about the employability, I think largely because I know it's quite demanding actually in Australia to be a medical scientist or a researcher. So it was largely on passion. I didn't think of anything else. I was like, I love doing this. That's what I'm going to pursue. If it's going to get me a good job or not, that's tomorrow's problem.
In your degree, was there any particular moment that you particularly enjoyed?
I think I like the fact that there's a lot of hands-on stuff going on in uni. I've always thought like uni was going to be very theory-based. You go to lecture halls, you look at learning materials, you look at slides, and it's all sleepy and boring. But I actually like get to do a lot of hands-on stuff. I actually got to be in the lab and learn to use all these machines, learn to do all these different scientific skills, and that was actually pretty fun.
What do you think a student must know or a student must be sure about before they decide on what degree they want to take, especially one that is quite specific?
There's a lot to consider actually in general, and like even though I said like mine was largely on passion, I think it's important actually to consider your future and if it's going to get you a job, so the employability and if it's the life that you want. Because initially I was thinking, could I be a lecturer, for example? Like that sounds like a more stable job, but do I see myself teaching? Do I see myself lecturing? You have to think about the benefits it gives you, not just professionally but also mentally, emotionally. Like if it's gonna make you happy, there's nothing worse than going for a job that you don't actually enjoy but you do it just for the sake of getting a job and for the sake of getting source of income. So it's a lot to consider, but I want to say that it's okay to not have it all figured out now. I still don't know what I want to do. So it's important to take these baby steps, to start with your passion and then go from there, go with the flow. It's not going to always be smooth sailing in finding a job and finding the right degree, but it'll get you there.
Will you be kind enough to draw us a picture of what does Tasmania look like and what
Um,
does it feel like living there and the university itself?
well, if I could sum Tasmania into two words, it would just be nature and peaceful. It's a perfect place, in my opinion, to study, even though I am personally not a big city girl. So I couldn't see myself studying in big cities, in big universities. I enjoyed the small universities, small campuses, really close group of friends, and outside of classroom, outside of uni, you still have a lot to do, especially if you're into outdoor activities. Tasmania is the perfect place to study. If you've been to New Zealand and you know New Zealand is very beautiful of its nature, Tasmania is essentially a mini version of it. So if you want to go to Australia and New Zealand at the same time, that's where you go.
What does the life of a medical research student in Tasmania look like day to day?
Okay, so generally during my undergraduate, Tasmania is very unique. I mean, my university was unique in its way of studying because we received the learning materials like a week prior to when we're actually learning it. So we kind of self teach using the learning materials that we were given, and then we attend classes basically for between 1 to 3 hours per week for each subject just to consolidate and summarize and ask questions. So you do all this learning and like questions prior, and then if you don't understand certain concept, and then you go and ask, reach out to your lecturers and stuff. And in terms of day to day, it was pretty, I mean, straightforward for my undergrad because I basically just attend classes about 2 3 times a week, and most of it are just done at home, which I think is good because you can learn it at your own pace rather than trying to like rush and take notes during your lecture and not actually understanding the whole thing. So that was good. And in my honors year, because honors is very different in Australia and Malaysia. I think Malaysia, most degrees do come with honors, and I think it's just another year of theory learning, and then you probably do the final year project towards the end. But honors in Australia, it's almost equivalent to a master's by research. So you actually look for a supervisor, you propose a project, and then you execute the project and conduct these experiments for the whole year, and then you do the thesis defense. So it's a very intensive program for a year. And for that one, my day to day would just be literally going to the lab morning till sometimes late night, just trying to finish my experiments. But it was what I want, it was what I love.
What would you say were the most challenging parts?
Because I'm a natural born high achiever, and I know that it's normal to compare yourself to other people, but I have this weird compulsion to compare myself to me. Whenever I achieve something, I tend to have this compulsion to do better than how I did before. So if I don't achieve that, it would make me upset. And because my parents were never like pressuring me to do well all the time to get perfect grades, but I did that to myself. I always want to get good grades. And so I think that was the challenging part of it, because especially being surrounded by all of these other smart people, I start to compare myself to them. And then because I don't do well as I did before, I start to compare myself to me. So that was it. But I think growing up now, I realized it's actually unhealthy for your mental health. It's not good academically, it's not good mentally. And it's okay to do it at your own pace because you're enjoying your own journey.
I want to pick up on the point that you said you're a natural born high achiever. In line with that, you graduated with first class honors. What does it take to be academically excellent?
One word: persistence. So because honors, my honors was essentially doing these experiments, and I think students need to be aware that doing a degree like mine, it takes a lot of patience because experiments may fail most times. It may take a long time to get results. And I think without persistence, you would not get to where I got today. And I wouldn't say it's studying for hours a day and not sleeping well, not eating well, that I got first class honors. I think it's mainly knowing what you're capable of, knowing your strength, and using that to your advantage, to your best fit, and knowing your weaknesses so that you can improve and address that as well. That's very important. It's not about your grades that shows that reflect your level of intelligence. It's how you cope with your stress, how you use your strength to study better and improve yourself.
Did your degree change the way you think about medicine, science, or the healthcare system in Malaysia or in Australia itself?
Yes, 100%. So my degree definitely opened my eyes about medicine. I think now I see there's a lot more to it. I think before studying it, I always see medicine as a doctor treating patients and giving medicine and making people healthier. But after completing this course, I actually see that going from a scientific discovery to translating into patient care, it takes years of research and investigations and evidence collecting, and you have to go through all these other researchers and policymakers and different levels of clinical trials. So there's a lot more going on. It's not just directly, oh, we have a new disease and we have a new treatment. There's a lot more manpower behind it, and I think it opens my eyes into a lot more unknown and unspoken opportunities in medical field.
Looking back, how do you think your education journey has shaped you as a person?
I think one thing, confidence. I was a very introverted person growing up. I was always underestimating myself. I would not push myself out of my comfort zone until I had to push myself and move to a different country. So that taught me a lot, and not just confidence in performing academically, but also just speaking and talking to strangers. Even smallest thing is that my academic performance, my progress now, my journey now doesn't just show my level of intelligence or how I pursue my degree, but also just my personal growth in general. I think it grew me like more personally than professionally and academically.
Do you have any regrets?
I think, as I said, I had regrets for previously underestimating myself. I used to not wanting to join competitions because I was scared of judgments. I was scared of myself. I was scared of embarrassing myself. One thing that reminded me of that, because when I finished high school, we had this activity where you would write secret letters to your peers, and then 90% of those letters from my friends said that I was underestimating myself a lot. Like I was more capable, and I give a lot less credit to myself. So I regret that most. But now growing up, I think if I had the chance to turn back time, I would try all kinds of different things and forget about the embarrassment and judgments.
Now that the world's your oyster, right? What does the future hold? What's the next step for you?
Well, my next step for me is hopefully to pursue PhD. I think in a field like mine, in order to go further, I think PhD is a good option. And even though I could get a job now, and it opens me up to a lot of career options, I love learning. I love the idea of just keep gaining knowledge, and research is all about finding gaps of knowledge and being part of scientific advancements. So I like the idea of that, and I think pursuing PhD will help me develop more skills in research. And I think from there, I would dream to be a full-time researcher and probably start my own team and contribute to the healthcare system.
For students in Malaysia who may be interested in science or studying abroad, what would your advice to them be?
There isn't one correct path to success. I think a lot of students, mainly in Malaysia, are trained to know that there's a traditional route to each degree. For example, you complete this course and you get this job, and it doesn't open their eyes to all of these opportunities that are actually there and would probably be better fit for some of them. I think they should know that even though there's a lot of opportunities out there, it's okay to not know what to do now. Even though I've gotten this far, I still haven't figured out what I should do, what I would be capable of doing, what I will be doing. So, and it's all right. It's normal. It's not human if you face some challenges and uncertainties. I would say that my advice is not to be scared to pursue less conventional path. It could be risky, but pursuing a specialized path like mine taught me to grow even more, and it naturally pushes me out of my comfort zone, because being in the minority essentially, and it doesn't mean that you won't get a good job. You will. It's just if you're willing to explore, I should say.
Will you be kind enough to describe your journey in Lepas Sekolah in 3 words?
Life changing, challenging, and rewarding. I'm Atilia, and this is my journey Lepas Sekolah.